My beloved child. Listen carefully, because what I am about to tell you is not a story, not a rumor, and not a random thought meant to scare you. It is a quiet truth that most people realize only when it is already too late. Somewhere very close to you, closer than your front door, closer than your daily routine, someone is watching your life with patience. They smile when they see you. They greet you politely. They ask harmless questions. And yet, inside their mind, a completely different plan is slowly taking shape. A plan that does not involve noise, threats, or obvious conflict. A plan that works best when you feel safe, distracted, and confident that nothing can go wrong. You believe your home is your strongest shield. You believe familiarity protects you. You believe neighbors are just background characters in your life. But what if I told you that this exact belief is the first crack in the wall? What if I told you that the most effective way to push someone out is not force, but silence? Not confrontation, but paperwork. Not anger, but patience. Stay with me, because once you see this pattern, you will never look at your surroundings the same way again. Let me take you one layer deeper, where things start feeling uncomfortable in a way you cannot explain. Your neighbor does not need to hate you to remove you. They only need to understand the system better than you do. While you are busy living your daily life, trusting routine, trusting fairness, trusting that nothing will change overnight, they are collecting small pieces of leverage. A harmless complaint here. A polite conversation there. A friendly observation turned into a written note. None of it feels dangerous alone. That is the genius of it. Each step is so small that your brain refuses to label it as a threat. And while you ignore these steps, the system does not. The system remembers everything. Patterns are formed. Records are created. Narratives are built. One day, when you least expect it, you are no longer a person in your own home. You are a file. A case. A subject of discussion between people who have never met you. And the neighbor who once smiled at you is suddenly just a concerned voice that sounds reasonable, calm, and credible. This is not drama. This is design. And once the design is complete, reversing it feels impossible. Now pause for a second and feel this part, because this is where most people lose. The plan does not start with you doing something wrong. It starts with you doing nothing at all. Silence becomes agreement. Inaction becomes permission. Every time you think, this is not serious, you are helping the story grow without your side being written into it. Your neighbor understands something critical that you were never taught. Control is not about power. Control is about timing. They move early, when emotions are low and attention is scattered. They speak first, when the story is still flexible. By the time you realize something feels off, the framework is already standing. You try to explain, but explanations sound defensive when the narrative is already written. You try to react, but reactions look emotional when the other side looks calm. And the most painful part is this. You start doubting yourself. You wonder if you missed something. You question whether you should have paid attention earlier. That doubt is not an accident. It is a feature of the plan. Here is the revelation that most people never hear until it hits them personally. The system does not protect the quiet. It protects the consistent. Your neighbor knows how to appear consistent. They repeat the same calm message. They use the same language. They show the same concern. Over time, repetition becomes truth in the eyes of authority. Meanwhile, your silence has no shape. It leaves no trace. It leaves no counterweight. This is why the plan works so well on decent people. People who avoid conflict. People who trust fairness. People who assume that truth automatically wins. The neighbor is not rushing. They are waiting for you to stay exactly as you are. Unaware. Unprepared. Comfortably predictable. And once the balance tips, it does not feel like an attack. It feels like a decision that has already been made somewhere else. A decision where your voice arrives last. And now I will leave you with this, because this is where part 1 ends, and where your perspective must change. The real danger is not that someone is planning to remove you. The real danger is that they are doing it while you still believe you are safe. While you believe tomorrow will look like today. While you believe your home is untouchable because it has always been yours. The title you clicked was not exaggerated. It was incomplete. Your neighbor is planning to kick you out by using something you do not see yet. Something invisible. Something slow. Something that only works if you keep watching passively. In the next part, I will show you the exact mechanism that turns polite concern into unstoppable pressure. And once you understand it, you will realize why most people never see it coming until the door no longer feels like theirs. Before you relax even for a second, understand this. What you are facing is not a person, it is a process wearing a human face. Your neighbor does not wake up one morning and decide to remove you. That decision matures quietly, like a shadow growing longer while the sun appears unchanged. Every interaction you dismissed as normal was actually a data point. Every time you adjusted yourself to avoid tension, it was recorded as compliance. The system your neighbor is using thrives on predictability, and you have been predictable in the most dangerous way. Polite. Silent. Cooperative. These qualities make you respectable in society, but vulnerable inside systems built on records and impressions. Your neighbor knows how to feed that system exactly what it likes. Not lies, not drama, but patterns. And patterns, once established, are extremely hard to erase. Here is where the strategy becomes almost invisible. The neighbor never positions themselves as the aggressor. They position themselves as the protector of order. Order sounds harmless. Order sounds necessary. Order sounds like something authority must preserve. So they frame everything through that lens. Small inconveniences become concerns. Concerns become reports. Reports become history. And history becomes justification. You, on the other hand, are living in the present. You react emotionally to something that was documented calmly weeks ago. This imbalance is fatal. By the time you speak, the system is no longer asking what happened. It is asking how to resolve what has already been defined as a problem. This is the moment when people feel betrayed by fairness itself. Not because fairness failed, but because they arrived late to a conversation that never waited for them. Now let me reveal the psychological trap that keeps you frozen. You assume that escalation will make things worse. You assume silence keeps peace. You assume time will smooth things out. Your neighbor assumes the opposite. They know that time sharpens narratives. Every day you stay quiet, their version becomes cleaner, more stable, more believable. Silence does not stop motion. It only removes resistance. And when resistance is absent, systems move in the direction of the strongest signal. That signal is not volume. It is consistency. Your neighbor sends consistent signals. You send none. This is why the pressure, when it finally reaches you, feels sudden and unfair. But in reality, it has been moving steadily toward you while you were standing still. Pay attention to this next part, because this is the turning point most people miss. The system does not ask who is right. It asks who has a record. Your memories do not count. Your intentions do not count. Your feelings do not count. Only what exists on paper, in logs, in timelines, carries weight. Your neighbor understands documentation as power. Not loud power, but quiet authority. They let institutions do the heavy lifting. They step back and let the machine speak for them. When the machine speaks, it sounds neutral, objective, final. And when you finally realize what is happening, you are not arguing with a person anymore. You are standing in front of a structure that has already absorbed their version as truth. This is where I will pause you again, because this knowledge must settle before we go further. You are not weak for missing this. You were never trained to see slow threats. You were taught to fear obvious ones. Raised voices. Direct confrontation. Visible conflict. But the modern removal does not look like danger until it is irreversible. Your neighbor is planning to kick you out by using patience, systems, and your own decency against you. That is the uncomfortable truth. In the next part, I will expose the single moment where this entire process can still be interrupted. Miss that moment, and everything that follows will feel like fate instead of strategy. There is a moment, brief and almost invisible, where everything can still change. Most people never recognize it because it does not arrive with urgency or fear. It arrives disguised as normalcy. A casual notice. A neutral conversation. A sentence that sounds procedural rather than personal. This is the moment when the system quietly opens a door, not for justice, but for response. If you miss this window, the door does not slam shut dramatically. It simply closes without sound. Your neighbor understands this timing better than they understand you. They wait for this exact phase, where the issue feels small enough for you to postpone, yet official enough to exist permanently. You tell yourself you will handle it later. You tell yourself it is nothing serious. But later never speaks as loudly as now. And once that moment passes, the story no longer needs your presence to continue. Here is the part that should unsettle you, because it explains why intelligent people still lose. The system rewards clarity, not truth. Clarity comes from early framing. Whoever defines the situation first shapes how every future detail is interpreted. Your neighbor does not argue facts. They establish context. Once context is set, facts bend to fit it. Your silence during this phase is not neutrality. It is absence. And absence is filled by whatever is already there. When you finally step in, you are not adding a voice. You are interrupting a structure. That is why your words feel heavy and ineffective. You are trying to introduce complexity into a process that has already simplified you into a problem that needs resolution. Now understand this deeply, because it separates those who recover from those who disappear quietly. The interruption does not require aggression. It requires presence. Timely presence. Documented presence. Calm presence. The power move is not to fight the narrative, but to exist within it before it hardens. Most people wait until emotions force them to react. By then, their reaction looks like instability. Your neighbor knows this. They expect it. That expectation is already accounted for. What they do not expect is early engagement. Questions asked without fear. Clarifications requested without apology. Records created without drama. These actions feel unnecessary when everything seems fine. But they are devastating to a plan built on your passivity. This is where fear quietly works against you. You fear being misunderstood. You fear escalation. You fear appearing difficult. Your neighbor fears none of these things because they are not seeking approval. They are seeking alignment with systems. Systems do not judge emotions. They track behavior. And behavior over time becomes credibility. If you remain invisible until pressure arrives, you will always appear reactive. If you appear early, consistently, and calmly, the entire dynamic shifts. Suddenly, the story has two sides. Suddenly, assumptions lose strength. Suddenly, the process slows down. And slowdown is the enemy of silent removal. Let this final thought sit with you, because it is the hinge on which everything turns. The plan only works if you believe you have no role until the threat becomes obvious. That belief is the real trap. The earlier you exist in the process, the less power the process has over you. Your neighbor is not unstoppable. Their strategy is simply patient. In the next part, I will show you how patience collapses when met with awareness. And why the calmest response at the right time can dismantle a plan that took months to build. Now we arrive at the phase where the illusion begins to crack. This is the stage your neighbor never wants you to reach, because it forces light into a process designed to work best in the shadows of routine. Awareness changes behavior. Not emotionally, but structurally. The moment you stop being passive, the system recalculates. Suddenly, timelines matter. Suddenly, wording matters. Suddenly, actions that once looked harmless are examined for consistency. Your neighbor feels this shift immediately, even if they never show it. Their calm becomes tighter. Their patience becomes strategic rather than natural. Because patience only works when the other side stays asleep. Once you are awake, every move costs more effort, more explanation, more risk. Here is the quiet truth about systems that most people never learn. They are not designed to crush you. They are designed to resolve imbalance. When imbalance appears one-sided, resolution becomes removal. But when balance returns, even slightly, everything slows. Your presence reintroduces friction. Friction forces review. Review invites scrutiny. And scrutiny is where silent strategies struggle. This is why your neighbor relied on time and silence. Not because they are powerful, but because speed favors the prepared and silence favors the planner. When you step in early with calm consistency, you are not attacking. You are recalibrating the machine. Pay attention to how subtle strength actually looks, because this is where people misunderstand power. It is not loud statements or emotional defenses. It is simple clarity repeated over time. It is asking for written clarification. It is acknowledging concerns without admitting fault. It is documenting your own actions with the same calm tone used against you. Your neighbor built credibility through repetition. You dismantle it the same way. By being steady. By being visible. By being uninteresting to manipulate. Systems lose appetite for cases that do not escalate, contradict themselves, or fit clean narratives. Complexity is protection when introduced early. This is also the moment where many people sabotage themselves without realizing it. They overreact. They rush. They speak from fear. That fear becomes the proof the system was waiting for. Your neighbor does not need to push anymore. They let your emotions do the work. This is why restraint is not weakness here. It is strategy. Calm behavior under observation redefines the story. It transforms you from a problem into a participant. And participants cannot be removed easily, because removal requires justification that survives scrutiny. Let me leave you with this anchor before we move forward. Your neighbor's plan is not fueled by hostility. It is fueled by predictability. The moment you change that pattern, even slightly, the plan begins to wobble. You do not need to win. You only need to exist consistently enough to prevent silent momentum. In the next part, I will show you why the final stage of this process depends entirely on whether you remain reactive or become deliberate. And that difference decides everything. This is the stage where outcomes are decided quietly, long before anything feels final. By now, the process has either slowed down or gained unstoppable weight. The difference between those two paths is not luck. It is posture. If you have remained deliberate, the system treats you as a constant variable. Constants cannot be removed easily. They must be accounted for. But if you drifted into reaction, the system categorizes you as noise. Noise gets filtered out. Your neighbor understands this better than anyone, which is why their calm never breaks. Calm is not kindness here. Calm is control over perception. And perception is the currency being traded. Here is the uncomfortable realization most people resist. The system is not emotionally invested in you staying or leaving. It is invested in closure. Closure means finishing a story cleanly. The cleaner the story, the faster the resolution. Your neighbor has been polishing a clean narrative from the start. You complicate that narrative by remaining consistent, factual, and present. Not once. Not dramatically. But repeatedly. Every interaction becomes a data point that refuses to fit a simple ending. And simple endings are what silent removal depends on. Notice how pressure changes shape at this point. It no longer looks like accusation. It looks like inevitability. Phrases become softer. Language becomes procedural. The tone suggests that the outcome is already decided, even when it is not. This psychological framing is powerful. It pushes you toward acceptance without resistance. Many people comply here, not because they agree, but because they feel tired. Fatigue is the final tool. Your neighbor does not rush this phase. They wait for your energy to drain. They wait for you to mistake calm pressure for fairness. That mistake ends everything. Hold on to this, because it is the last pivot before permanence. The moment you accept inevitability, you surrender authorship of your own story. The system then completes what it started, efficiently and without drama. But if you remain deliberate, if you continue to show up calmly and consistently, inevitability collapses. Outcomes reopen. Alternatives appear. Delays become decisions. And decisions invite review. This is where many silent plans dissolve, not with confrontation, but with exhaustion on the other side. And now I will end this part with the truth that reframes the entire journey. Your neighbor was never powerful. They were patient. Patience only works against inaction. Once met with awareness, presence, and consistency, it loses its edge. What looked like a silent attack reveals itself as a fragile construction held together by time and your absence. In the final part, I will show you how this story truly ends. Not with conflict, not with loss, but with clarity that returns control to where it always belonged. This is where the story resolves, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet shift of gravity. At this stage, the system has been forced to look again. Not because someone demanded it, but because consistency made ignoring you impossible. The narrative that once flowed smoothly now meets resistance at every turn. Timelines stretch. Assumptions weaken. Confidence on the other side becomes cautious. Your neighbor feels this change even if they never admit it. What once felt like certainty now requires effort. And effort is something silent plans are never built to sustain. Here is the ending most people never imagine while they are still afraid. The system does not declare a winner. It loses interest. When a case no longer fits a clean conclusion, momentum fades. Attention shifts elsewhere. Pressure dissolves into procedure. And procedure, when slowed enough, stops being a weapon. This is not failure or mercy. This is design. Systems move toward efficiency. You became inefficient to remove by simply being present, documented, and calm. That presence rewrote the cost of continuing the plan. Notice how power looks different now. Your neighbor no longer leads the story. They respond. Their signals lose sharpness. Their patience, once endless, starts showing limits. Because patience without progress becomes frustration. And frustration exposes intent. The moment intent becomes visible, the plan loses its greatest advantage. Silence. What once operated unseen now struggles under observation. And observed strategies rarely survive unchanged. This is the clarity that returns control to you. You were never fighting a person. You were navigating a process. Once you understood the process, fear lost its grip. You stopped reacting to pressure and started shaping outcomes. That shift changes everything. The system recalibrates around those who engage it correctly. Not aggressively. Not emotionally. But deliberately. And deliberate presence is something no quiet strategy can overpower. Let this be the final truth you carry forward. Your home, your place, your stability were never taken from you. They were challenged by a method that only succeeds against unawareness. The moment you saw it clearly, it stopped being inevitable. The story does not end with you being pushed out. It ends with you standing exactly where you are, no longer invisible, no longer passive, and no longer part of someone else's quiet plan. My beloved child. This is the final layer, where the truth becomes impossible to ignore. At this point, the plan either collapses completely or exposes itself so clearly that it can no longer pretend to be harmless. What once felt like a slow, invisible force now looks fragile. Not weak, but dependent. Dependent on your silence. Dependent on your confusion. Dependent on your fear of speaking at the wrong time. The moment those dependencies disappear, the structure loses balance. And balance, once lost, cannot be faked inside a system that survives on alignment. Here is what actually happens when awareness reaches its peak. The process stops moving forward and starts circling. Requests repeat. Reviews multiply. Decisions delay. This looping is not accidental. It is the system signaling uncertainty. Your neighbor never planned for uncertainty. They planned for momentum. Momentum requires one direction. But now there are questions. Now there are records from both sides. Now there is no clean exit that does not raise doubt. Doubt is dangerous for any silent plan. It invites scrutiny. And scrutiny forces accountability, which was never part of the original design. This is where emotional pressure quietly flips direction. The weight you once carried begins to shift. You feel steadier. Clearer. Less reactive. Meanwhile, the other side grows careful. Words become measured. Actions become slower. That confidence you sensed earlier fades into caution. Not because you attacked, but because you stayed. Presence is exhausting for strategies built on absence. Every day you remain consistent increases the cost of continuing the plan. And eventually, the cost outweighs the benefit. Understand this deeply, because this is the resolution most people never reach. The system does not announce that you are safe. It simply stops pushing. Silence returns, but this time it is different. It is not silence moving against you. It is silence standing still. The threat dissolves not with victory, but with irrelevance. Your neighbor's effort loses priority. Attention shifts elsewhere. And what once felt inevitable becomes something that never fully happened. This is how the story truly ends. Not with doors closing, but with them staying exactly where they are. Not with fear, but with clarity. You were never powerless. You were simply unaware of the game being played around you. Now you see it. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The neighbor's plan depended on darkness. You brought light by staying present. And in that light, the plan had no place left to hide.